So this week we've just been working in the Django framework, but today we're going to actually incorporate third-party APIs. So up until this point, we've just been building basic CRUD apps, create, read, update, delete, and there hasn't really been any like sexiness to it. It's just like create, read, update, delete, list things, edit them. It's pretty much just that's all we've been doing. But with third-party APIs, we can extend the functionality of our app to make it more, to just make it a little more sexier, I guess, and extend the functionality of it. With that, does anybody know what an API is? All right, I see Augie. It says, what is an API?
As far as I know, an API is something that somebody else builds that has some information in it that you can access as a developer to put on your site. So like APIs that I've heard of is like a Google Maps API where you would build a site for something maybe unrelated to maps, like I don't know, restaurant reservations or something, and you could put a map API on your website so that people could get directions to the restaurant, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't say it better than myself. So if you think of an API, like outside of software engineering or software development, there are certain things we do on our own, and there's other things that we pay people to do. So, for example, you have all determined like, hey, Code Platoon's a really good coding bootcamp. We're going to pay them, or we're going to attend that coding bootcamp versus another one, or versus learning everything on your own, which you can definitely do. Like all these tutorials and everything is online. So you can definitely learn coding on your own, but you convince yourself and saying, hey, Code Platoon, they're supposed to be good at what they do. We're going to pay them to get the information to become a software developer. Same thing with like being a mechanic, or if your car breaks down, like I can literally learn everything on my own, or I can pay somebody to that already is an expert at, doing maintenance work on a car, and I can just bring my car to them instead of having to learn everything myself to fix it myself. And with that, so if we were to want to build an app that does, let's just like, if we wanted to make like a DoorDash or an Instacart clone, what would we need? Like if we were to build it from scratch, what would we need to do? Say like DoorDash. What are some things we would need in the application?
Like a checkout function or a profile creation?
So a checkout function, when you say checkout function, what does that mean? Like,
I just mean like, I guess like just to grab a cart, grab everything that you would want from particular restaurants, and then have a function to like send that order out to the restaurants, and then also send it out to like whoever our driver would be.
okay, so like a checkout, that's more like more of a feature. So we would need like a checkout function. But with the checkout function, when we send an order in, what would be included in that? If like we're going to, what's something when we send an order, and what else are we doing simultaneously? We have to pay for it, right?
Right.
So we have to like grab credit card information, send it off to, all the credit card processors. So we can build that on our own. We can build like a credit card processing from scratch, or we can hire a company to do it for us that already has all the regulatory infrastructure in place, so we don't have to store credit card data on our servers, because there's a lot of legality things to go along with storing credit card information, like PCI compliance. So we can hire a company to do it, or use a third-party API such as Stripe, PayPal, Venmo, or Square, or any other types of these payment processing companies. So we can do that. What else do we need if we're doing something like DoorDash?
You need to get like a list of all the places you can buy stuff from,
Okay, a list
like
of all the,
businesses that you could use. Yeah.
okay, like a list of all the places we can buy from. So we can either aggregate that list by ourselves, so we can literally like go down the streets and like, okay, there's a restaurant, open up, like go in there and be like, okay, here's the menu, make a copy of that menu and store that information ourselves. Or we can use a company that already kind of does that for us. So Yelp has an API that already has all the ratings of all and like the categories of all the restaurants. What else would we need?
Kind of like what Augie was saying, wouldn't you need some sort of map interface and to tell you what restaurants are even available to deliver to you?
Exactly. We would need some map interface. So we can build that ourselves by literally launching satellites in the air and, taking image photographs of the Earth and then come up with some routing algorithm to see which restaurants are near us and like directions and all that. So we can do that.
That's how I want to do it.
Or we can just, have Google Maps do it for us. Because they've already done the infrastructure. They have already done all the heavy lifting for us. Is there anything else we would need? We need GPS that's already kind of built into our phones. So I don't know if we actually need to build GPS for that. Is there anything else we would need? I'm just thinking.
Maybe like a search function.
So like a search function. So is there already an API for search? So we can actually, I think Google actually has its own search for like addresses and everything. But as far as like, when you say search, like search for a restaurant?
Yeah, search for a restaurant or search for like a type of food or maybe like by price or something.
Yep. So I think Yelp's API kind of has that for us. So we can utilize Yelp, or we have to categorize all that stuff ourselves and store it in a database and, query it ourselves. So those are like what, 3 different APIs, so like Google Maps, some payment processor, what was it, like a Yelp API that has all that information about restaurants. So those are 3. I think that's probably it. I mean, I'm sure there's more that we could possibly use, but so with those 3 different APIs, each API, just like in real life, if I'm talking to my boss versus I'm talking to my girlfriend or my significant other or a child, I'm going to be talking, the language I'm going to be using and my expressions are going to be different between all 3. So how I'm going to be talking to a child, I might be a little more animated and like raise or lower my voice and make weird sounds to a child. So I'm interacting with a child in a very unique way. And hopefully I'd be interacting with my boss or Rod or John in a different way. So you'd be a little bit more formal, a little more professional in my tone and everything. So depending on who I'm speaking with or communicating with, I'm going to be communicating in a different manner. So APIs are the same way. So how I'm going to be interacting with Google Maps API is going to be different than how I'm going to be interacting or communicating with the Yelp API versus how I'm going to communicate with the Stripe API or the PayPal API. So each API has strict, like specific rules on how do you interact with them. What questions do you have so far? So I'm just going to kind of show you. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. So in your Django application, if you wanted to make a request to an API, so all that data, like for Google Maps or Yelp or Stripe, all that data is stored on their local server, so like on Yelp's server. So if I wanted to make an API request, I would literally, so in my Django application, I'd make an API request to an outside server like Yelp or Google Maps, and I'd send this API request in a very specific way, depending on the documentation of how Yelp or Google Maps wants me to communicate with it. And if I successfully communicate it with it or like want to grab specific information from it, I'll get a response back. It'll be a good response. It'll be a bad response. It'll be like, hey, yeah, you successfully, here's the data that you want. Does anybody have any questions so far? So we're not actually interacting. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, are APIs something that like we can make, or are these things that like only big companies have, or like very experienced developer companies?
You can make your own. And we are going to be essentially creating our own API with Django. That's how we're going to communicate, attach React to Django, is by making an API. It's not like an official API, but yeah. Go ahead, Augie.
Sorry. So and then this is, I'm sure, something we'll learn just in the course of the lecture, but are APIs usually written in a specific language, and do they have to interface with a specific language, or are they sort of, I mean, they must be written in a language, but they can attach anywhere, kind of, or what?
Yeah, it depends on the API of what language. They might have like developer kits specific in certain languages like JavaScript or Python or C++ or Java, but mainly you won't have a problem finding one that utilizes JavaScript or Python.
And then my other question was, do APIs normally cost money for developers?
It depends on the API. I mean, the ones you'll be using won't cost money, but depending on like what you want to do, they could cost money. So, for example, if you wanted to create, I don't know if anybody remembers the application called Mint. It like aggregates all your bank account information and it categorizes them, so to make budgets and make sure, like, just essentially gains visibility into what your spending habits are. This was out in like probably late 2010s, maybe early 2010 or something like that. Well, they needed an API to connect to all the banks. That type of an API would cost a lot of money, because you're getting bank account information from aggregating all these different accounts from different banks into like one service. So there are like APIs out there for that, but yeah, those types will cost money, and you will encounter ones that cost money. I mean, some of Google's cost money, but nothing extraordinary. We're not going to be interacting with those APIs that cost money. What other questions do you have?
Yeah, I have a quick one, Tom.
Yep.
So with these APIs, so say I use PayPal as an API for, payments on my project. If PayPal goes down, the whole world breaks, right? So can you somehow set up like a backup, like a default API if this one's not working, like an if statement? I know that seems silly, but like, okay, can you have it set up that way or no?
Well, you probably just let the user choose how they want to pay.
Okay, that might be a bad example, but yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, so if you're using strictly like Stripe's API or PayPal's, like, I doubt, like, because you'll be sending information directly to the PayPal or Stripe API, and if they're down, it won't process to another API. I've never seen anything like that before. Yeah. All right. So here's an example of kind of what an API looks like when you're actually making a request. So I've got 3 different examples of APIs. The National Park Service has one, Ticketmaster, which you'll be using today, and Dark Sky, which is a weather API. I think it's now deprecated just because I think Apple bought them and they're no longer work. But notice how it's all in the URL, and based off what you put in the URL, like the search query, here's a search query, latitude, longitude, etc. So these are 3 different ways I'm communicating with like the National Park Service, Ticketmaster, and this Dark Sky weather API. And what I'm going to get back is a JSON response. It could be in a different format, but we're going to be primarily working in JSON. Does anybody know what JSON stands for?
JavaScript object notation.
Yep, exactly. JavaScript object notation. It's just a way to parse through. It's a way data is passed through the browser, and we can use it essentially in JavaScript. So here's an example of what it looks like just from the National Park Service. And notice in our APIs, like the URLs that we're actually going to, they have got a section for an API key in all of them. API key, API key, API key. So an API key is just a way for the API to know that it's you, that it's somebody is reaching out to me, reaching out to like the server and be like, hey, is this a legitimate request? It is. Okay. Send back that response that they're asking for. And then there's also the API key is public. So up in here in the URL, these are all public API keys. So anyone in the world can see them. It's not really that big of a deal if everyone sees them. It's not, yeah. So don't worry about public API keys. And then they've got secret keys. These are private API keys that you should keep secret that are unique to you as an individual. So if you have an account such as Twitter, so this is an example of Twitter's developer platform. You got the public key, which is right here, and then there's a secret key, which is, I'm blurring it out because if someone had that secret key, people would be able to access literally my personal Twitter account and like post stuff on Twitter for as me. So these are secret keys that you want to keep private. And the keys, the API keys you're going to be using today and usually in the future, depending if you want, and depending on the type of API you want to use, more likely than not, they won't have a secret key. Does anybody have any questions about API keys?
I have one question.
Yep, Lou?
Let's say you make this really cool app and you push it up to GitHub, but it has your secret key in it. How would you store it instead?
You wouldn't store it in GitHub. You'd store it probably on your server as a local variable. But we can get that into the future. But yeah, don't push your secret keys up to GitHub. Just delete them and store them on your local machine somewhere.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry, real quick. Does the same apply if you pay for private GitHub stuff?
What do you mean when you pay for private GitHub stuff?
Doesn't GitHub have like a paywall where you can store stuff privately?
I don't know. I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So you'd be storing if it's a secret key, you'd be storing it as an environmental variable on your local machine. All right. So with that, we're going to go ahead and build an app that uses Google Maps Embed API to display a map on the screen. So I'm hitting here in my third-party API directory, and the first thing I want to do is create a virtual environment. So python-make venv. So I'm just literally creating a Django project from scratch like we have been doing. All right, list it. I'm going to source env bin activate. All right. So now I can do Django admin start project. And let's call this one landmarks. So I'm going to display a bunch of landmarks. All right. So next thing I need to do is actually pip install Django. Just make sure it's, even though I already started the project, I just want to make sure that Django's installed in this specific virtual environment. You all should be pretty familiar with this by now. So I created landmarks. Here's my landmark project. Now I'm gonna actually create an app. So Python manage.py, start app called map. Uh-oh, what happened? Oh, so I'm here. I'm going to need to cd into landmarks. And now I can create an app. So there's my map app. What's the first thing I need to do after I create an app?
Wanna
Add it to your settings.
install apps.
I heard a couple people talk. What was it? Is that Dylan or what'd you say?
You'll want to add it to the installed apps under settings.
Yep. So in my settings, down in my installed apps, I can put map there. All right. Now in my map models, I'm going to create a model of landmarks. So I'm just going to create a class, landmarks, landmark models dot model. Oh. All right, and now this model is just going to have two fields on it. Chart a name and an address. All right. And then I'm going to actually add a dunder string just so it prints out a little bit better. And let's see, return f string ID self.id self.name is, I'll just say located at self.address. All right. So once I'm done creating all of my models for this, what's the next thing I need to do?
Make your migrations.
Yep. What happens when I make my migrations? Jarrell, what happens when I run make migrations?
So the migrations is already made, but it'll make another, like a 001 initial file in your migrations. And then you have to migrate it.
What is this actually? What does this file do?
So it sets up your tables for whatever database you're going to be using.
Okay. Yep, exactly. It sets up the tables. It's going to create the tables for my database. So after I make migrations, what's the next step I need to do? Timothy.
Which one? Or I guess
Cummings.
You load some data into your database through shell.
So I've made my migrations.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, then you migrate them.
All right, cool. Yep. I need to migrate them. Python manage.py, migrate. All right, so it added all these built-in models that are already come installed in Django, and then I installed this map 001 initial. And then, yes, now I actually need to add some landmarks to it. But before I do that, let's actually create our URLs for it. So in here, I've got my admin URLs. And now I'm going to create a landmarks. And then I need to include the map.urls file. Then I also have to import include. So in my landmark project, I'm creating a URL to landmarks, which I want to display all the landmarks. So I'm including map.urls. So I'm looking into my map app. I'm looking for the URLs file. I don't see that yet created. So I need to create that file, urls.py. And I'm just going to copy this over. And the first thing I want to do is just go to a views/landmark list method with a named route of landmark list. All right. So I created a URL with a view method called landmark list. What's the next step I should do?
Build that method.
Yeah, thank you. So I can go into my views and create a landmark list method. It takes in a request, and I'm going to display. So this, when I go to landmarks / right here, I want to just list all the landmarks. So we're going to landmarks equals landmark dot objects dot all. So I'm going to have to import from my models, import landmarks. And now I can return render the request. And now I'm going to create a template called landmark list.html, and it's going to render all the landmarks. So landmark list landmarks. What questions do you have about that process? You know, create URLs, create views, and now I'm going to have to create a template. All right, so I'm going to have to create this landmark list HTML template. So inside my maps, I need to create templates. Inside my templates, I need to create a map, which is map directory, which is the name of my application. And then here, I can landmark list HTML. And then in this div, I'm going to say my landmarks. And then I can say, you know, for landmark and landmark list. And I can create a div and just say like h2. I want to create a link to this with an href to initially nothing, and then landmark dot name with an address of landmark dot address. What questions do you have so far about creating the views and creating the landmark list template?
Hey, Tom,
Yep.
since you passed in views landmarks as the, okay, so it'd be landmark list, not landmarks.
Yeah, okay.
In the, I guess in the landmark list HTML, that's because that's the key of the dictionary, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm just keeping these the same. Like I can call this anything, like this landmark list.
That line 8, that dictionary that goes in every single key. It's a dictionary, right? Key value pairs. Every key that goes in there becomes what's called a context variable for your template. It's so that's what landmark list becomes. That key becomes basically something that the templating engine can use like a variable. So if it's a query set, it's like a list. You can iterate over it. It could be any value, an integer, a string, a list. The templating engine can work with those things, but just know that you pass a dictionary to a template and all of the keys become context variables. So you can treat them like they have some data attached to them. Yeah, just like Tom is doing on line 5 right there.
Thank you, Chris. All right, so now I've created my first URL, created my view, created my template. Now let's actually create some data. So I can say Python, so manage.py shell. All right, so I could say from map.models, import everything. And now I'm gonna create 3 different landmarks. I'm gonna create the bean in Chicago. I'm gonna create the Eiffel Tower in France. And then I'm gonna create the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And I can quit. Cool.
So you don't have to save them individually?
If I did, what is it? .objects. If I do objects.create, it automatically saves it to the database.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yep.
And in this case, your database is a SQLite.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So right there's my SQLite database. All right. So now let's clear and let's actually start this server. Python manage.py run server. Uh-oh, it happened. Names views is not defined. So I'm going to go here in my URLs. It looks like I did not include any of views. So it says from I import views. Uh-oh, it says landmarks, cannot import name landmarks. All right, so looks like it's plural. I just do that. Okay, hopefully we have it now. Let's open up incognito window. If I do localhost 8000, I get nothing. If I go to localhost 8000 landmarks, there we go. Got my landmarks, the bean, Golden Gate Bridge, and Eiffel Tower. So now, when I click on one of these, I want to go to the individual landmark, like so, but I haven't created any of that yet. So what's next? What's the next thing I should do if I want to create the detail page?
Create a path for it.
Yep, exactly. Thank you, Heather. So create a path. So create a new URL. I'm just going to come down here and say int landmark ID, view landmark detail, and landmark detail. Now it's going to throw an error, has no attribute landmark detail page, so, or no view, so def landmark detail takes in a request, a landmark ID, and now I can, get a landmark by its ID. I'm going to create a quick helper method. I'm going to say def get landmark. It takes in a landmark ID and just returns landmark.objects.get ID equals landmark ID. So now I can just say like the individual landmark and call that get landmark helper method, pass in the landmark ID to it. And I'm just gonna actually print the landmark just to see if that works. So if I go back to here and click 1, I'm gonna get an error, which is fine because it's not returning an HTTP response. But if I look down here in the terminal where I'm printing this landmark ID, if I come down here, I can see the location, being located at 201 East Randolph Street. So now I can return, render the request. the map landmark detail page.html, and I can just pass in the landmark as a dictionary. Now I can go to my landmark list or my template and create a new landmark detail page, landmark detail.html. And in here, I'm just going to render a div that has the landmark name and landmark address. But now I actually want, if I go back here, I want these links to go to those pages. So if I go to my landmark list right here, my href, and I want to create a named route. I don't want to hard code it. So I can URL, landmark, detail, and landmark.id. What is going on right here? What is this? What is this actually doing?
Is that looking for the name in URLs, landmark detail, and then also passing in the landmark ID?
Yep, exactly. And I could do landmark ID equals landmark ID, as you probably saw in your nested routes challenge. So yeah, this is a named route. So if I come back here, refresh, I go to the bean, it goes to /1, 2, 3.
Hey, Tom, can I make a note real quick?
Yep.
Just because I see a lot of students do it and don't know why later. Can you go back to your browser window? And can you, like, because you're the client and you control the URL, can you put an ID that doesn't exist, like 100 or something? Yeah. So in Python, when you normally when you raise an exception, it crashes your program, right? If you don't catch the exception, it crashes your program. Django eventually catches your exception for you, but if you let Django catch it, this is what you get. You get, because we're running in debug mode, Django catches it and raises it out to a rendered template. And it shows you, it doesn't crash your server or anything. It lets your server keep going because it doesn't want to crash your production server or anything. Anyways, this is happening because there's one gotcha to using what Tom used in views.py. If you go back to views.py, Tom, on line 7, return landmark.objects.get. So most of the time y'all have been using .all or .filter. Those don't have any raised exceptions. You either get like a query set, or you get empty, like an empty list. Neither of those things raise an exception. But if you use .get, in the case where ID equals doesn't exist in your table, your attached table, so the landmarks table, if the ID doesn't exist in there, if it doesn't make a match, it will raise a does not exist exception. You did not wrap this in a try and except block, so therefore it's gonna raise this page right here. And I see a lot of students do this every time, like they'll use .get and they won't wrap a try and accept around it because that's the other case, right? In the case where that ID does not exist, you're not checking for that side of the question, I guess. So to solve that, all Tom has to do is wrap a try except around it.
Yep. Like
try. And this might be jumping ahead a little bit, but in the case of Django, yeah, you would ask the question, like, if I'm returning a landmark instance on one case, yeah, I want to return something else in the other case. But this also has a problem too, right? Because if you return a string back and your template tries to use that string as a landmark, it doesn't have dot attributes on it, so it's not like that won't work either. So you could return like none from it, And instead of doing what he's doing on line 17, maybe you do a conditional check on line 17 and say, if landmark is not none, I want to render this template. Otherwise, I want to render like a 404 does not exist, or render a different page that, you know, deals with my case where I didn't find anything. So I've had a lot of students ask me questions on how to deal with a case like this. And I just wanted to point that out. Like .get raises an exception, and anything that ever raises an exception, you want to like deal with that exception by wrapping it in a try except.
Yep. Thank you, Chris. Yeah.
Sorry, that was a lot of time, but
no, yeah. So
Actually, I have a question about that. So I remember seeing somewhere that like there's like a debug mode in Django, and if you set the Boolean to the other thing, then it'll generate its own 404.
yeah, if you have debug set to false, it will actually hide all of these exception messages, but it won't be helpful because you'll still see a 500. You'll still see a request in your in the console down there. It'll say 500 because it still raised that exception, but it just hit it from it just hit it from you. But that means you also have to have the templates in order too. Yeah, Emma, if you're wanting to go over that, we can. It goes a little more in depth. I don't know if I want to go too far with it, but you can actually see where it says 500 right there, right in the purple on the console.
Yeah, I saw.
Yeah, so it still raises a 500, but taking it out of debug mode takes the debug mode templates away. So then you would just see like a white screen, and that's what you want in production. You don't want the user to see all your debug settings and stuff rendered out. So you take debug off, but then you just get like a white page, which isn't helpful to the client because it's not supposed to be, but it's also not helpful to you, but because you need to know what happened as a developer to fix it. But yeah, it goes a little more in depth. I won't jump too far into that, but yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, essentially, if it returns nothing back or if it throws an error, you'd want to render something else out. So that's where you'd have a try except, and then down here have like an if statement. If you get something back, render this, else render an error page, a totally separate template. Awesome. Any other questions? All right. So let's continue. So we've got our landmark list, and when we go to each individual landmark, it looks pretty cool, right? No? Actually, it looks like ass. So let's actually utilize Google Maps to actually render out the actual Google map of the Eiffel Tower, of the Bean, etc. So I'm actually going to go here. So here is the Google map. Google Maps is awesome, or just Google in general is great. Their documentation is amazing. So you can see like an overview of Google Maps platform. You can go ahead and get started. It's going to load. Oop, I'm actually going to go back right here. So here are all the different types of maps you can use for Google. So you have some software developer kits specifically for Android, iOS, some maps for static API. We have a JavaScript API. So if you want to use JavaScript, we have a Street View, maps URLs. But what we want to use is the Maps Embedded API, which adds an interactive map or Street View panorama to your site using simple HTTP request. So I click on that. I'm going to go open it up, and it's going to tell us exactly how to get started. So here, exactly kind of what it looks like. This is what so in here we have the Space Needle. So it looks like we need to display an iframe in our HTML. So we have an iframe with this and queue, which is and query, which has a space needle, and it says allow full screen. But essentially, it's an iframe with a source attribute that equals this URL. So if I scroll down here, you can even see like forming the URL. So google.maps, embed, version 1, mode, your API key, and including any other parameters. So here's more examples. So it looks like we can also have like, instead of up here with the query for Eiffel Tower or the Seattle Space Needle, it's like space plus needle. You can do it via coordinates, latitude and longitude. You can have different zoom. So if I wanted to zoom out, like maybe my zoom might be like 30 and it zooms out. And you can also have the map type of satellite. So instead of just the normal view, you can have a satellite view. So with that, I'm just going to copy this over to my Django project. And inside my map detail page, I'm going to embed this iframe in here. And it's probably not going to work because I don't have my API key yet, but here's like, this is all we really need to do to display this map. So what questions do you have so far? So if I come back here and if I refresh this, it says Google Maps platform rejected your request. The provided API key is invalid. So if I look over here inside my source, which is the link to this API, it doesn't have an API key. So I have to get an API key. So if I come back over here, instructions are pretty clear. It says get an API key before you begin. You need a project with a billing account, blah, blah, blah. You might not, I don't think you have to actually do a billing account or anything. So it says creating API keys in the Google Cloud, is it Google Cloud platform console and the project selector page, select or create a Google Cloud project for which you want to add an API key to. So I'm going to open up this into the Google Cloud platform. And here are all my projects that I've created in the past. All right. I'm just going to look over here. It says create a Google Cloud project. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new project. Let's just call it, Mike Platoon Maps example.
Tom, is this all in your personal like Gmail, Google account?
Yep. So right here, that's my Tom Pre Gmail account.
Okay.
So I'm going to create that Google project. So it's creating it right there. Might take a little bit. But let's kind of go back here, and it says after my project, once I select my project, go to APIs and services / credentials page. And let's see what that looks like. All right. So right here, I've selected my Platoon Maps example, and you can see all these other projects. Now it says go to API and services and click credentials. And it doesn't look like I have anything here. So let's actually go back to the dashboard. I think I need to enable the Google Maps. So create credentials, API key. So yeah, let's actually look at here. So it says go to API services, credentials. It says create credentials, API key. So it looks like that is my API key right there. So did I already create it? So yeah, so I created an API key by doing create credentials. And let's see if this is going to work. So if I come over here, go back to here, this is my API key. So if I substitute where it says API key with my actual API key and come over here and refresh this. Oh, it says still not working. I think I have to register. Let's scroll down here.
And this is an example of an API key that you don't mind people seeing because they could just go get one themselves. And if they steal yours, it doesn't do you any harm, really.
Correct. All right. Dismiss. Dashboard. I think I have to enable Google Embed. So yeah, so the first thing I need to do is I need to enable this Maps API inside the Platoon Maps example. See if this is going to work. All right. So Maps embed. Do I have credentials yet? There's my API key. Okay, cool. So now, if I refresh, there we go. Let's go back. So I go to the bean. I'm rendering the Space Needle because the Space Needle is hard-coded. Gate bridge. So there we go. Now I'm hard-coding the Space Needle. What questions do you have so far? But we want this to be a dynamic. So in our views, in our detail, landmark detail page, we want to render or extract the address and input it in here in some manner. So there's a couple ways we can do that. We can say def generate Google address, which takes in an address and does something. So in here, address for Google equals generate Google address, and I'm going to pass in the landmark address.
Can you remind me why you're doing the underscore in front of that one?
This is just to notify to other developers that this method is only used within this file. So it's not, it's like a helper method almost.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm going to print the address.
But why wouldn't you also have it in front of get landmark?
I guess you can have it up there as well. But
Okay, I thought maybe they were different.
no. So I've got this generate landmark address. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to refresh that. And now you can see it says Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco, California. But if you look at the landmark list, it looks like we need pluses in between all of the spaces. So what we need to do is format this address, this Golden Gate Bridge, to include space or include pluses in between this, or in replacing the spaces. So a plus in between each word.
Sounds like a technical interview challenge.
Yep. So what I can do is modify address equals. So I've got the address right here. How do I replace spaces with pluses?
I think it just used a replace function and put spaces and then the replacements as the second argument.
Place, and then the first argument is the space, and the second argument, let's just say it's the plus. We can print the modified address. So if I refresh this, oh, what happened? modified address. Oh, here we go. So there we go. Golden plus Gate plus Bridge plus San Francisco plus California. So in my landmark detail page, I'm going to actually extract all of this out of here and put it in my views. So I'm going to return an F string of the oh man, what happened? Like so. So I'm going to return this entire thing as an F string. And then instead of here, I'm going to say the modified address. So I'm extracting the actual source out and into my views. So now this address for Google, I'm going to just print this out. Oh, what happened here? There we go. So if I come over here and refresh this, doesn't get anything. But if you look down here where I'm printing on line 16, the address for Google, it's printing out that URL with the San Francisco, with the Golden Gate Bridge. And if I do the landmark 1, it's printing out the URL for 201 East Randolph Street. So I've got the address for Google. Now I can actually add that to this for Google into this as a key in this dictionary. And I'm actually going to extract all this because it's starting to get kind of long. And I'm going to create a separate variable for that so I can just pass in the data right there. So now I have the access to this address for Google, the key in my landmark detail page inside this source. Whoop. So I can say address for Google. And now if I refresh, I get the bean, which is located right here in Chicago. If I want, whoop, the Eiffel Tower, goes to the Eiffel Tower. If I go back, I get the Golden Gate Bridge, shows the Golden Gate Bridge. Let's actually kind of change some. If I come over here, I want it to be like I want it to have a satellite. So I can say type map satellite. So over here, type map satellite. Or actually, that doesn't go there. Where does that go? Inside of that URL. So inside of my views, I can say type map satellite. Come back to here and refresh it. It should be a satellite view of it.
So Tom, to be clear, to make a new location here, if you wanted to put the Empire State Building or something,
yep.
You for these, you did it in the shell, right? You had it already made and you pasted it into the shell for educational purposes.
Yeah.
But if we were going to do it ourselves and create like a form or something, you would have people put in the name of the landmark or the name of the landmark, the city and the state and the country or something. And then you would plus those all together for the modified address.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Cool.
All right. What questions do you have about using the Google Maps API?
Are all APIs kind of unique in how you call them, or will they all be pretty similar to this?
No, they're all going to be unique. So this one's different just because it's located within an iframe. Where is it? Like in here. But let's actually take a 5-minute break and we'll jump into other ways we're going to be doing API requests. So we'll be back at 2:22.